In this episode of Guts and Guns, we are exploring the 4th of July, its meanings, and the history behind it. Let's get into it.
Okay, so when you picture the 4th of July, what comes up? I mean, for me, it's definitely the fireworks.
Yeah.
That big burst of light.
Oh, yeah. Fireworks, maybe the smell of barbecue.
Exactly. Barbecues, maybe just that nice long summer weekend feeling. We all know the scene, that whole celebration vibe.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the question. Is it just a party? Or is there something, deeper going on, something really fundamental about America?
That's a great question.
Because that's what we want to do in this deep dive. Go past the fireworks, past the barbecues, and really explore what America's Independence Day actually means.
Yeah, look at the history, the ideas behind it.
Right, the historical roots, those big foundational ideals, and how the whole celebration has changed over time, and how it still shapes what it means to be American today.
And for you listening, digging into this, it's really key. It helps you understand the foundation the country was built on. It gives you a much better handle on the bigger story, the values that have really driven the American experience.
Okay, so let's get into it. The 4th of July, we celebrate it as the day. But what exactly happened? Was it just like, okay, we're breaking up with Great Britain, or was it truly a new beginning of a new country?
Well, it was definitely aiming for that new beginning. Before that moment, you just had 13 separate colonies, right?
Yeah.
All under British rule. But things had been getting worse for more than a decade leading up to 1776. Relations were souring. It even spilled into actual fighting before they officially declared independence.
Right, Lexington and Concord.
Exactly. And underneath all that was this growing desire the colonists had to just govern themselves. And it wasn't even a totally new idea for them. It kind of echoes why the first pilgrims came over way back in 1620 seeking that self-determination.
So July 4th is the day we all circle on the calendar. But I've heard there's a slight complication with that date. What's the real deal there?
Yeah, that's where it gets interesting. We celebrate the 4th, absolutely. But the actual vote, the moment the Second Continental Congress said, okay, we're doing this, we're independent, that happened on July 2nd.
July 2nd.
Yeah, 2 days earlier. The 4th was when they formally announced it, when they adopted the final wording of the Declaration of Independence, the famous document itself.
Okay, so who actually wrote this incredibly important document? Was it just one guy sitting in a room?
Well, Thomas Jefferson gets the main credit. He was picked because he was known as an exceptional writer.
Okay.
But his first draft, it wasn't the final one. It actually went through a lot of changes. A committee, including big names like John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, they revised it pretty heavily.
Adams and Franklin, wow.
Yeah, and then the whole Second Continental Congress debated and tweaked it further. So it wasn't just one person's vision. It was very much a group effort to get that foundational text just right.
Huh. It's easy to think of it as just like an angry letter saying we're leaving. But when you read it, it feels almost legal. Like you're making a case.
You're spot on. It wasn't just yelling rebellion. It was a very deliberate, almost lawyerly laying out of their complaints against the king.
Like a court case.
Exactly. Think of it like presenting evidence in court, or maybe even like an impeachment proceeding against King George III. They'd been gathering this evidence for years, listing out what they called a long train of abuses and usurpations.
To justify breaking away.
Precisely. To build a logical, reasoned argument for why they had no choice but to cut ties.
So what kind of things were on that list? What were these abuses they were citing?
There were 27 specific grievances listed. And it's not just the number, it's the pattern they showed. Things like the king refusing to approve necessary laws, stuff the colonies needed.
Like what?
Oh, laws about managing the enslaved population or creating colonial currencies, things like that. Also, blocking the administration of justice by making judges totally dependent on his whims.
Wow.
Yeah, and dissolving their local governments whenever they push back, imposing taxes without asking them. No taxation without representation.
That famous line.
Right. Plus, forcing colonists to house British soldiers, cutting off their trade, even dragging colonists across the ocean to face trial for supposed crimes. It was a really comprehensive list.
So this declaration, born out of all those complaints, it really did mark a new start. It wasn't just about what they were leaving, but what they were aiming for. Something like the pursuit of happiness. But we have to acknowledge, right, that initial pursuit, it tragically didn't include everyone. Native Americans, enslaved people, They were left out of that promise at the start.
That's absolutely critical. And it brings us right to the other side of the Declaration. Not just the complaints, but the powerful statement of ideals. Liberty, justice, self-governance.
A positive vision?
Exactly. These were meant to be the bedrock, the foundation for this new nation.
Yeah.
Ideas like natural rights, the people having the power, the rule of law, all bundled together.
Okay, so beyond the list of grievances, what were those really core principles, the big ideas they were putting forward that make it more than just a historical document?
Right. So you get these 4 fundamental truths. The first one is maybe the most famous and revolutionary. All people are created equal.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
Exactly. Penned by Jefferson. And, even though America has struggled and continues to struggle to live up to that fully, it remains this incredibly powerful foundational aspiration, a constant goal.
So equality is the starting point. How does that connect to the unalienable rights part?
It flows directly from it. If everyone's equal, then everyone is endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. The big 3 mentioned are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the idea here, especially with liberty, was that these rights are natural, God-given. They don't come from the government. The government's job is to protect them.
And including the pursuit of happiness, that was quite radical. Usually, political philosophy talked about life, liberty, and property.
Right, John Locke.
Exactly. Swapping property for happiness broadened the idea of what government was for. It suggested the government should help create conditions where people could actually flourish, find fulfillment, not just protect their stuff. That's a big shift.
Okay, so people have these rights naturally. Where does the government get its power then, according to the Declaration?
That's the third big truth. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. The power comes from the people.
Not from a king, not from God, directly to a ruler.
Nope, from the people themselves. This was revolutionary. It flips the whole power structure upside down compared to monarchy. Power flows up, establishing popular sovereignty. The people are the ultimate authority.
And what if that government, the one the people consented to, stops doing its job, stops protecting those rights?
Well, that's the fourth principle. When the government does not protect the rights of the people have the right to alter or abolish the government.
A right to revolution, basically.
Essentially, yes. Jefferson wrote that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. It provides the philosophical green light for overthrowing tyranny, reinforcing that the people hold the ultimate power to reshape their own government.
And you mentioned John Locke earlier. These ideas weren't created in a vacuum, right? They drew heavily on Enlightenment thinking.
Oh, absolutely. Locke's ideas about natural law, natural rights, the social contract, they were hugely influential for Jefferson and the others.
And these ideals, even with all the initial contradictions and struggles, they really did lay the groundwork for future progress, didn't they?
Yeah.
They're still the benchmark people use today to push for a more just society.
They absolutely are, which of course leads us straight into that ongoing tension between the ideals they wrote down and the reality of the nation they were actually building.
Let's talk about the immediate aftermath. The Declaration is signed, the war is fought, and eventually won. What changed right away?
Well, one really significant thing was the states writing their own constitutions, starting in 1776 and 1777. This was pretty new. Britain didn't have a single written constitution like that.
Interesting. What did those state constitutions look like?
Generally, they created governments with fairly weak governors and really strong legislatures. They had regular elections, and they did expand voting rights somewhat. You can really see their fear of strong central power, like the king they just escaped.
So power to the elected representatives.
Pretty much. And this changed political and social life, too. More people could vote, so you started seeing more new men, ordinary citizens getting involved in government, not just the traditional elite.
A shift away from aristocracy.
Yeah, a move towards a society based more on merit, though obviously still very imperfect. But the early federal government, under the Articles of Confederation from 1781, that was deliberately kept weak. Again, fear of central power. The Articles didn't give the central government power to tax or regulate trade effectively or even set up federal courts. That caused its own set of problems down the line, leading to the Constitution we have now.
Okay, what about longer-term changes? economically, for instance?
Big changes there. Breaking free from Britain meant ending mercantilism, the system where colonies basically just existed to enrich the mother country. This opened up new trade opportunities for the U.S. and spurred homegrown manufacturing.
And land.
Huge impact. Winning the war opened up vast territories to the West for American settlement and, yes, invasion. This drove expansion and created new internal markets.
Did this revolution make waves internationally?
Oh, absolutely. It's often seen as kicking off the age of democratic revolutions. It inspired people fighting for change in France and Haiti, across South America.
Wow.
It even forced the British Empire to rethink its own structure. Historians talk about a first and second British Empire, partly because of the lessons learned from losing America.
Okay, but let's circle back to that tension we mentioned. The high-flying words about equality versus the reality, especially slavery. How did they even try to square that circle?
They mostly didn't, initially. It's the great paradox at the heart of the founding. The Revolution, for all its talk of liberty, left Native Americans and enslaved people of color largely behind. This fundamental contradiction festered and ultimately exploded into the Civil War.
But the ideals themselves had some impact on slavery early on.
Yes, they did. The rhetoric of liberty did motivate some individuals to free the people they enslaved. And critically, most northern states began passing laws for gradual emancipation in the decades after the Revolution. So it wasn't nothing, but it was far from universal freedom.
And it's powerful, isn't it, that even back in 1859, groups like the Banneker Institute in Philadelphia were telling African Americans, yes, celebrate the 4th, but also use its ideals to point out the hypocrisy.
Exactly. That language of equality became a potent weapon for the abolitionist movement, and later for the civil rights movement. It was a promise the nation made that activists could demand it live up to.
What about women? How did the revolution affect them?
Women played active roles during the war, supporting the cause in many ways, which increased their political awareness. But they didn't gain equal political rights afterward. Instead, the ideal of the Republican mother emerged women's role was to raise virtuous sons to be good citizens.
So influential, but indirectly.
Right. But again, like with abolitionism, the Declaration's principles later became a cornerstone for the women's suffrage and women's rights movements. They could point to those words and ask, what about us?
And for Native Americans, the outcome was pretty bleak, wasn't it?
Tragically, yes. Many tribes had sided with the British, hoping to stem the tide of westward expansion. When the Americans won, that protection was gone, and it accelerated the process of displacement, broken treaties, and conflict.
So summing up this impact section, the revolution didn't create a perfect society overnight. Far from it.
Not even close. But the ideas articulated in the Declaration, they've been this incredibly persistent, powerful tool used again and again by groups fighting against injustice and demanding inclusion.
Which makes the 4th of July maybe less about just celebrating a finished event.
And more about, well, recommitting each year. It's like an annual reminder of those founding ideals, liberty, equality, and the ongoing work needed to make them real for everyone. That journey towards a more perfect union.
It's always fascinating how something as intense as a revolution turns into, well, a holiday with parades and fireworks. How did that actually happen? How did we get from 1776 to the celebrations we know?
Yeah, the evolution is really interesting. And guess what? The very first big public celebration wasn't even on July 4th.
Get out. When was it?
It was July 8th, 1776 in Philadelphia. They had public readings of the newly adopted Declaration. Bells were ringing, bands were playing. It only shifted to being celebrated on the 4th the following year, 1777.
Huh. And John Adams kind of called it, didn't he?
Yeah.
About how it would be celebrated.
He totally did. He wrote this amazing letter to his wife, Abigail, right after the vote for independence, probably on July 3rd, actually predicting the day would be marked forever with pomp and parade, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations.
Illuminations. Fireworks.
Exactly. And early celebrations really leaned into that. They had mock funerals for King George III, burying the monarchy symbolically. George Washington himself, in 1778, gave his soldiers a double ration of rum to celebrate the anniversary.
Okay, so a bit of rum definitely helps the celebration. But these early events, they weren't just parties, were they? Sounds like they were pretty political, too.
Oh, very much so. They were public spaces for expressing patriotism, but also for critique. You'd get these really fiery speeches, taking shots at England, twisting the lion's tail, as they called it.
Laugh slightly, twisting the lion's tail.
Yeah. And they had things called plug uglies. Basically, funny floats or clowns making fun of political figures or issues of the day. Satire was a big part of it.
So when did celebrating the 4th become, like, a really standard thing everywhere?
It actually took a while. It only became truly widespread after the War of 1812.
The Second War with Britain.
Right. Winning that war, or at least surviving it, really boosted American nationalism. After that, you saw deliberately patriotic celebrations pop up all over. Communities would even compete to build the biggest bonfires on July 3rd night.
Wow.
And the day became so significant that big national projects, like starting construction on the Erie Canal or the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, they timed the groundbreaking ceremonies for July 4th.
Tying it to national progress. Makes sense. And when did it become an actual official holiday?
Much later than you might think. Congress declared it a federal holiday in 1870, but it didn't become a paid day off for federal workers until 1938.
1938, that's quite late.
It is. And some traditions have incredibly long histories. The celebration in Bristol, Rhode Island, they've been doing it every year since 1785.
Wow, since 1785.
Yeah. And near military bases, there's the salute to the Union, firing one cannon shot for each state at noon on the 4th. Oh, and here's a really strange historical footnote. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, who were central to the Declaration, they both died on the exact same day.
No way.
Yes. July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration. And James Monroe, another early president, also died on July 4th a few years later in 1831.
That is spooky. What a coincidence.
Isn't it? Just adds another layer to the day's history.
So bringing it to today, how do we celebrate now? I mean, it feels like America's biggest summer party, right?
Mm-hmm.
Peak summer fun, getting together with people, food, music.
It really is. And what's striking is how many core elements haven't changed much in, well, over 240 years. Those fireworks everyone loves, that goes straight back to the cannons and muskets they fired in the earliest celebrations.
And the parades, right. So many towns have parades.
Absolutely. Community parades with floats, marching bands, playing patriotic tunes. That's a huge tradition. Think of the big one in Bristol, Rhode Island we mentioned, or even quirky local ones like the Pet Parade in Bend, Oregon, often followed by festivals or carnivals.
And you can't forget the food. Barbecues seem essential.
Oh, completely. Barbecues, picnics. Getting together to share food is central. Hot dogs, hamburgers, corn on the cob, watermelon. It's the modern version of those early communal feasts.
Yeah.
And gathering around food is just a powerful way to connect, to share that celebratory feeling. It really helps build those, bonds that unite us.
What else do people do? I always see tons of red, white, and blue everywhere.
Yep, wearing the colors is big, waving sparklers, especially for kids. Backyard games, maybe some patriotic crafts, those little mini flags everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of people travel, make it a getaway weekend.
It all seems pretty lighthearted, just summer fun.
It does, but these things, these traditions, they act like powerful rituals. They help create this shared feeling of unity, this kind of shared symbolic identity. For you listening, joining in on these things, even just observing them, it's a really direct way to plug into American culture, to feel the spirit of the holiday.
So pulling it all together, what's the big takeaway here? The 4th of July is clearly way more than just a day off work or an excuse for a barbecue.
Absolutely. It's this potent reminder of how the nation started that bold break from monarchy, that commitment to governing themselves, to individual liberty.
A reminder of the beginning.
Right. And the Declaration itself, those ideals we talked about, liberty, equality, the right to pursue happiness, they aren't just dusty old words in a museum. They're meant to be living principles. They're still shaping debates and the direction of the country today.
Even with all the struggles and the times the country hasn't lived up to them.
Especially then. That gap between the ideals and the reality, and the constant effort to close that gap, that striving for a more perfect union, that's a huge part of the American story the 4th represents.
So it's a celebration, but also maybe a challenge.
I think so. It's celebrating the historical moment, yes, but also celebrating those core values, liberty, justice, self-determination. It's a day to appreciate the freedoms people have, but also maybe reflect on what it means to be a citizen in a country that governs itself, the responsibilities that come with it.
And it feels like a day that's meant for everyone in America, right? Whether your family has been here for generations or you're a newcomer, it's sort of an open invitation.
It really is. It's an invitation to join in celebrating this shared idea of freedom and self-determination, to become part of that ongoing story.
So for you listening, seeing, or even taking part in the local celebrations, it's more than just watching fireworks.
Exactly. It's a way to connect with the culture, the history. Understanding the Fourth is like unlocking a door to understanding the bigger American narrative, which is, complicated, full of struggles, but also full of ideals and this constant push forward.
So here's something to maybe chew on as you see the celebrations this year. How does this whole story, the 4th of July, with its mix of high ideals born centuries ago and the very real ongoing struggles to achieve them, how does that resonate with maybe the pursuit of liberty and justice where you live, in your own community or even your own country?
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode. We hope you found it intriguing and enticing. Come back next week for another episode of Guts and Guns.